Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. We are now starting Echelon Decode. This is a panel discussion. We are talking about a post-COVID scenario. That is not to suggest that businesses are essentially looking at post-COVID as their only concern right now. Surely we are in the throes of this challenge. I think all businesses are potentially trying to figure out the end game here, how this is going to work out. That is certainly, I suppose, foremost in everybody's mind here. While you're all listening, a quick note to our speakers. I'm encouraging all of them to share as much as possible. I know the outlook is foggy at best, right? So while you share what you can. If you need to, you can always qualify a statement saying, okay, this is uncertain, but here are potential scenarios, right? If we do that, if we do share it that way, I think it will be of the greatest benefit to our audience. Also, a note to the audience, thank you everybody for joining us online here. We have a few hundred registrations on Zoom, and we expect our Facebook audience to be much bigger. I'll surely check in a little while what that audience numbers are. And we'd really like for this to be an interactive session in two ways, right? I'd also like all of you who are on the panel here to sort of validate, discuss challenges with each other. And we'd also like the audience to participate, which means, and the best way that you can participate is to by logging on to Slido, slido.com, and the event name is decode, #decode. Right? If you go there, you can put your questions in. I'll be monitoring the questions. And even if you don't intend to put a question in, just go there because you can vote up the questions. You can see what others are asking about, and you can sort of weigh in by sort of putting your vote onto questions that are already there. So that's how we'd like to see the audience participate. So thank you very much for being here. We will ask each of the panelists to take up to 5 minutes to make some opening remarks, and then we will get to the discussion, and we will quickly bring audience questions also in. So Ashok, I think we will ask you to kick off.
Okay. So good morning, Shamindra and everyone. And first of all, thank you for having me. And I think this subject is very relevant given the unprecedented times that we all are going through. So as an organization, you know that I head Softlogic Group, which has a big interest in hospitals, retail, and even into leisure and the financial services. And also I'm the chairman for Sri Lankan Airlines. So even that, right, the aviation industry is the mostly affected industry. And so I think if you look at it, I mean, most of our businesses have completely affected by COVID. There's no question about it. Some are in a very unprecedented way, some are in a moderate way. So if you take even the hospital, that you might assume that the hospital may be doing fairly okay. But even that, since given this curfew situation, we are struggling. We are currently doing about 25% of our normal revenue, because even the doctors are scared to come and see patients given the situation. So you can just imagine about the retail. Retail is almost zero because all the shops are closed. But only good thing what we see there is our online sales have picked up dramatically. We are doing almost about 4 to 5 times online, especially on the grocery side, our supermarket side. So I must say that, I mean, that's a good learning for us. And I must say that even the consumers have got used to the online space because of this situation. And I think online is going to stay here. So that's one good silver lining out of this. But given the rest of it, the financial services are not that impact, but, the retail and the leisure is very much impacted. And as I told you, the airline is really struggling So today's context, I mean, it's not about your bottom line and the P&L. I think today it's a fight for our survival. So it has come to that level. So hopefully, we hope at least this situation will improve, because nobody would know until that we find a vaccination or a drug. But I mean, by listening to what's happening around the world, that I mean, there are a lot of encouraging things are happening in terms of the research and things. Hopefully, we will have a vaccine. If you have the vaccine, I think that we can all get back to our normal way of doing business. But still, I think, on the short term, that we may have to survive with maybe whatever the drugs which they're talking about. So the last 2 days, there was some encouraging news in terms about, reducing the period of the illness with one particular drug. So I think hopefully things will, somewhat would be okay within the next 1 month or so. And also from government perspective, also, I think that we have been on curfew for 1.5 months almost. So I think we can't continue to go on curfew. We have to also, I feel, learn to live with this. So I think, so we need to have a balancing act. We can't completely disrupt our economy. So I think we need to consider that. I think we have stayed enough inside. We need to find ways with the safe measurements and the health measurements. We need to restart our economy. So that is my take.
All right, that's a fairly frank assessment, Ashok. I mean, just since I have you here, you must be surely thinking about scenarios at this point, right? You don't have the luxury of, as head of this group, you don't have the luxury of suggesting to the team, let's wait for 2 months and see what happens, right? Can you talk us through some of those scenarios? You've outlined how big the challenge is. I'm sure it is similar to many businesses in Sri Lanka. It's not unique, but it is serious. What are the sorts of scenarios that you're looking at currently?
So see, I mean, one thing is that you can't have a permanent solution, because we don't know, the situation is changing every day, right? So we have to, whatever the situations that you have to analyze and evaluate on a daily basis, you have to be on the ball, right? To, I mean, get whatever the business and, fight for your survival. So that's why I said it's all about cash flows at this moment. It's about money, right? So obviously there are some, solutions coming from the government side in terms of the banks, moratoriums, the banks are helpful in terms of push back some of your, capital payments and stuff like that. So I think, so those have given, some sort of relief. But at the same time, that I think there are also other learnings, if you look at it, I mean, we can't work out of our offices, right? So we have found ways of, working from home to a certain extent. I think that working from home is going to be a permanent thing. And this also has allowed us to realize that you really don't need that much of workforce in your building, right? In your office. Really, I would say about 40% of your people actually can stay back at home. And also this has given us opportunity to realize that we are overstaffed in certain places. So I think those have come. And so there's no luxury in this today. I mean, there's no space for us to play around. So you need to be very strict in terms of your cost-cutting measures. You need to run with the bare minimum. So that is what I'm sure that everybody does today's context. So also, right, I mean, there are benefits to us also, because your electricity cost is less, your transportation cost is almost zero because nobody is traveling, right? So we also have taken measures such as, salary cuts, because we know that this is not going to over in 3 months, right? So obviously, financially, this will impact us for the entire financial year. Hopefully that we have to recoup in next year. So I think, I can't explain to you in detail because we are into many businesses. So we have stakes in every aspect of economy, I would say, in this country. So, so each one needs different solutions. So obviously, right, I mean, we are on the ball with, the best way of, managing this situation.
Cool. Just one quick question. Can you tell us how many employees you have in the group altogether?
So Softlogic Group has about 11,000 employees. But if you take Sri Lankan Airlines also, which I'm the chairman, that has about 7,500 employees.
Okay, right. We'll come back to that. So next I'll ask Christopher to go. Christopher is not in Colombo. Thank you, Christopher, for the effort. He's in Melbourne, and currently, Christopher's your biggest challenge is trying to find a way back to Colombo, right? I gather.
Yes.
And if there was an award for most interesting backdrop, I think you would get it.
This is my daughter's apartment, so this is some modern art behind me.
Very interesting. Okay, floor is yours, Christopher.
Yes. Okay. Good morning to every one of you, the panelists and Shamindra, and of course the audience. Of course, the first speaker, Ashok, found my way to Melbourne, and I hope hopefully he'll get me back to Colombo soon. Sharing my views on the effects of COVID-19 on our businesses. So the Access Engineering Group covers mainly five spectrums of the businesses. One is, of course, engineering. The other one is real estate. The other one is property development. We have an exposure in automobile, and the most recent venture is in export supported logistics. So the COVID-19 impact on all these businesses are variable. It is not the same across all businesses. So, for example, if I talk about the mechanical engineering arm where we maintain container handling equipment in the port of Colombo, there is absolutely no impact out of COVID-19 because the port is operating. And a full crew of more than 200 employees, engineers and technicians are working 24/7. So that has no impact if you can categorize it that way. Then the civil engineering business has an impact. Right now, of course, we are assessing the extent of the impact, but definitely there's an impact. As Ashok said, this is a pandemic. The impact is across all businesses, and there will be only one or two businesses which might not be vulnerable. So the civil engineering, what we have done is, okay, from a business perspective, we have a good order book. I mean, currently we have one of the best order books in the history of the business. But the implementation is the question here. In civil engineering, you have to do the business, So the challenge here is, how do we do this business? As Ashok, pointed out earlier, in every business, as I think the panelists would agree, we have various segments of cost. One is, of course, salaries, labor, overhead, and certain things we can stop, maybe reduce salaries, but certain things like depreciation and bank interest, irrespective of whether you're working or not, they keep ticking on. So this is coming back to the situation, this is a pandemic. This is definitely not a V effect on our business or economy where we just drop down and come back to previous existing levels, like what happened in the Easter Sunday, bombing. It had an impact, but we got back to normal quite in a relatively short period. This is definitely an L curve, It is going to be a recession, definitely for every businesses. And we are trying to determine what is our lateral level of the L for every business. So every business has a different lateral level. So we have identified the lateral levels of every business for the next 6 months, considering that we are operating on a COVID-19 situation, where there is no remedy or immediate, cure or to eradicate the pandemic, which is the reality. So based on that, of course, we have restructured. Of course, try to reduce our overheads. Some are not reducible, like bank interest and depreciation, of course, which we'll have to live on. Cash flow is critical, like Ashok pointed out, which we monitor very carefully and see where we can have access to these cash flows. And so on. So basically what we have done is we have reassessed our businesses, restructured the position where we have found out where the lateral level of our L is, and see how long we can stay there. So
Christopher, can I interrupt you? Can you explain
Yes.
to us what you mean by lateral level, just for the benefit of everybody listening?
Basically, it is it's simple economic terms where you have a depression, no business, so you come down and you see what is your bottom. Your bottom is the lateral level of your L, the bottom. Right. So under COVID-19, we are identifying what is this bottom level is. So different businesses have a different bottom level. For example, if I say Access Realties, where we are doing building rental business, the bottom level of the L is a little higher than the construction business. The mechanical engineering business, the bottom level is even higher. But the real estate business, the bottom level is even lower. And then, of course, the export logistic business, provided we have some challenges there, which I will explain to you. We can implement it. We can have the bottom level pretty high there also. So in a situation like this, we have to see how best we can restructure and work under the circumstances. That's what we have done. So so basically, then we will also want to know how are we. So the elasticity of our demand of our businesses and under the current scenario is depending on the sector of business we are in, as I explained to you. Then, of course, talking about the automotive engineering I spoke about, and fortunately for us, some of the key projects we have already commenced. We have lobbied with the relevant authorities, they have been understanding, and we have given them proper COVID-19 compliance and mitigatory measures in the work sites. And we are already operating in more than 5 work sites, actually now up to today, 6 work sites, with of course limited operations. We have of course challenges, but at least we are operating. Operating means it is revenue generation, and of course people are employed too. So it reduces the burden by that much. In the automotive sector, of course, under the property development, as I told you, the rental business has a limited impact, but of course the impacts will come on the tenants because they're obviously not using the premises, and they are having their own challenges. So those are things we have to mitigate along the way. Property development, of course, we'll have to, see how best things work out in the next 6 months to see what type of real impact it will have on the home buyers and, of course, the investors, because of the, the constraints in their income and, their priorities also. Then the automobile industry, of course, we are in 2 sectors. One is the luxury segment with Jaguar Land Rover, and one with Isuzu, which is the commercial segment. The commercial segment is lesser affected than because there is no import restriction on the commercial sector up to now. But on the luxury sector, of course, there is a ban imposed, import ban imposed. So there is a direct impact there. So that's a sector which we have to look at. Then on the export logistics, where we are currently building the biggest warehouse facility for Kemsolodsta, the biggest warehouse in Sri Lanka. Now that is a challenge because one is, of course, it's supporting a huge export business. It will be the biggest intra-port trade in this country once it's completed. Kemso will use it for that purpose. And just to give you an idea of how big it is, the roof covers about 14 acres. The roof only of the warehouse. So just for the audience to know what type of warehouse it is. So we have already commenced and of course progressed to about 30% of the work. We are supposed to complete it by end of January. Next January. So the challenge here is 2 fronts. That is, if we don't complete the project, we don't get the rental income. This is a 10-year lease rental, and income is in dollars, so it's a good income for the country also in foreign currency, which is desperately needed at this stage. So of course we have, it's a force majeure situation and we have all the right to delay the construction, but delaying construction is not going to help us because we are going to reduce in rental revenue. So we are finding every possible avenue to continue that project, including what skills we can use locally, because that warehouse has some very modern and first state-of-the-art facilities, first time used in this country. So we are also now currently, the new model is, of course, we are having e-learning here, and so that our people can be skilled up to do the work here. So those are challenges which we are currently facing and we are trying to mitigate. But the critical thing is, of course, to allow room to work in even confined environments or confined places, so that some activity takes place.
As a group, can I also ask you, Christopher, how many people do you employ?
The Access Engineering Group employs about 7,000 people directly, and indirectly, maybe with subcontractors and all, maybe another close to that number.
Okay. Ranil, can we switch to you? Can you sort of give us an overview of how things are, and it's also an opportunity to set out any discussion points for the rest of the webinar?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Shamindra, for inviting me. I work with Hirdaramani Group, which our core business is apparel. We have investments in renewable energy and leisure, but I will focus on apparel. And many of you must be familiar with the current status of the apparel sector. And a few weeks ago, there was a webinar where there were discussions on apparel. But very briefly, let me mention the key indicators. Apparel sector exports approximately $5.2 to $5.5 billion a year, and directly employs about 350,000, plus indirectly about another 250 to 300,000. Our main markets are USA and Europe, which takes up about 85% of our production. If I can quote Mr. Ashraf Umar, who's a leading personality and the CEO of Brandix, 2 weeks ago at a webinar, he said that this is the perfect storm for the apparel sector. And it really is, because if you look at this year, early part of the year, China started shutting down and our supply chains were disrupted. Then in March, Sri Lanka, mid-March, Sri Lanka started shutting down and our production was disrupted. And then very soon after that, our main markets, USA and Europe, were disrupted, and the retailers, our customers, started having issues. And we had all three factors affecting us within a period of 3 to 3.5 months. And then we find our customers now asking for longer payment terms, canceling goods, pushing back on what we have already produced. And there is enormous stress and pressure on the whole sector. And when you take, if I was to guess the smaller SME apparel businesses, I think they've already been explained to the government, they can hardly make March and April salaries. The larger companies might be able to manage for a few months, but because it is more people intensive manufacturing, our cost of 60 to 65% is salaries. It will be very difficult to sustain at this level of operation. Now, currently, the government has supported, and we have had support from the BOI, the EDB, the public health inspectors in the area, the police, security forces, to start small with all the, the regulations, the health controls, distancing. But right now, I think if you take the average, 25 to 30% is the maximum we are running. In addition, we get disrupted when you have a curfew, sudden island-wide curfew, there are issues. So right now, it's not a good situation. And when you look at apparel, you usually take orders for the next season. So the next few months, maybe 3 to 6 months, looks very, very tough for the apparel sector. And I think right now, Ashok mentioned banks, definitely we will need support. The entire sector, SMEs, government and bank support to sustain. And it is difficult to make a prediction on how things will move forward. Only thing is we can hope that there's a quick solution or a vaccine or something that solves this issue. Otherwise, business in the apparel sector will be very hard for this year for sure.
Ranil, can you give us an idea about your operations, right? Hirdaramani has apparel operations in Sri Lanka. How many people do you employ here, plus overseas? Can you give us a sense?
Yes, directly in Sri Lanka, about 22,000. And overseas, we have in Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Ethiopia. Bangladesh is about equal to Sri Lanka. Vietnam is about 15,000, and Ethiopia is about 2,000.
How's the situation with regard to running factories in Bangladesh and Vietnam compared to Sri Lanka right now?
Yes, I'll take up Vietnam. Vietnam did not close. they ensured that there were controls, and they continued right through up to now. Bangladesh, as you must have seen, did close, but last week they restarted on the 26th, I think, and they are back in operation.
So out of curiosity, when you source orders as a group, right now it may be more predictable or more reliable for you to put these orders to a factory in Bangladesh or Vietnam, possibly Vietnam, because the delivery is more assured, the risk is lower. Is that a fair way of looking at it? Or is there a skill difference in the sorts of operations you run?
Not really. We do have that option, but sometimes the customer specifies the location, then we have to do it there.
Okay. One final question. We've been hearing about PPE manufacturing, which is personal protective equipment, right?
Yes.
I'm trying to get a sense about how big this opportunity is, right? Now, given your experience in the industry, and assuming you had PPE orders for the next 6 months to 1 year, how much of your capacity can be taken up by this? Is it negligible or is it significant?
I'll come to that, the opportunity. Before that, we in the last 3 weeks, we have been producing some protective clothing for the Ministry of Health and been distributing it to the hospitals and trying to support the initiatives that have been done in Sri Lanka. But again, the output is very small because of all the restrictions. The opportunity from the inquiries we're getting, and I think the entire apparel sector is getting inquiries on PPE. Yes, there's opportunity, and as you can imagine, the numbers are enormous. It's in hundreds of millions. But of course, what is happening is when there's so much capacity in the world, you mentioned Bangladesh, Vietnam, Indonesia, China, Sri Lanka, India. Once it opens up, there'll be so much capacity, but the earlier demand has dropped. Definitely apparel, there'll be a fairly significant drop. So then this will be a filler, but there will be a price competition because everyone will want to fill their plants and at least get some cash flow. As Ashok said, forget the profit, try and survive. So I think margin will be very small, but yes, if there is, currently I know that there are orders in Sri Lanka which are coming for masks. Then I'm sure the other clothing opportunities will also be there and we'll be doing that.
Do you foresee this filling up maybe 10% of your capacity in the rest of the year?
Tough to say. I mean, at the moment, I think if we can get the orders, we take more than that.
Okay.
But it's tough to say. It's very difficult. We don't have visibility at this time. It's very uncertain.
Thanks for being so candid. Stephen, may I ask you to weigh in next?
Of course. Good morning, Shamindra. Good morning, everyone. Great to connect. I guess for us at Hemas, what we're seeing is a remarkable sort of range of business outcomes over the last few weeks. We have businesses within the groups where we're seeing, 5, 6, 7 times our historic sales levels. And those admittedly are more niche e-commerce activities, which all of a sudden have just sort of blossomed and developed. Across our bigger businesses, we have businesses running at 100%. And again, those are very pharmaceutical focused in terms of what they do. I've then got a bucket of businesses within home and personal care, within pharmaceutical manufacturing, and 1 or 2 other areas that are clawing, including hospitals, which are clawing their way back from 25% type of level in terms of revenues back up to above 50%. And that's all very much work in progress. And then I've got businesses with either very low levels of activity or in the case of hotels and aviation related, no revenue activity at all at the moment. So I think what we're seeing is a very diverse range of outcomes. I think if there's good news for us as a group, it's the fact that we are primarily focused on the Sri Lankan consumer and are providing products and services that are, if not essential, are a fairly routine part of life. So people continue to buy soaps and shampoos and toothpaste. So that's good news for us. Obviously, we all need to continue to take our pharmaceuticals, particularly those that have a recurrent need in that area. So those businesses are clearly impacted. Everything is impacted. And it's just a matter of our ability now to claw these businesses back. I think as others have touched on, there's huge operational challenges at the moment, getting factories working, getting employees into factories, trying to operate those factories in a safer manner as possible, because factories are structured for efficiency, or up until this point in time, they'd been structured to be all about efficiency. Now, clearly the game has moved, and the priority is how do we operate our factories in a safe way. Therefore, we see the productive capacity of those various assets being quite significantly impacted. But I say we're in a place where we've got businesses that are functioning well. We've got businesses that are, trying to overcome all of the logistic and supply chain and operating challenges, pulling themselves back up to above 50% of revenues, and somewhere it's hard to see where revenues will come from in the immediate future. Clearly the approach that we take, I think, as others have already talked about, this is fundamentally a game of cash. Well, fundamentally it's a game of operating safely and thinking hard about the health and safety of your employees. Second, you go cash flow. Cash flow is all that really matters at this time. The challenge that we've set ourselves across all of our businesses is to try and get back to cash break even by the month of June. In some businesses, I can see how we can do that. In other businesses, we're pulling our hair out and trying to come up with good answers to complicated problems. But when you've got no revenues and you've got an employee base, and as already referred to, you've got interest costs and depreciation costs, hugely challenging thing to do. So it's just thinking hard about cash. I think, as others have already referred to as well, there's incredible unpredictability about the situation that we face. For us, one of my concerns is, I think what we've seen so far we've seen a lot of operational shockwaves, the curfew and the difficulties of operating within that. We've had a major health shockwave. I don't think we've yet seen the economic shockwave. And that comes clearly as Ranil has referred to, as those, workers in garment factories either don't get paid or get paid significantly less. What do they do with that reduced income? How do they spend it or not spend it? And so there's this, as you look out there and trying to work out, what is going forward, our approach is very much to try and take a worst case and try and find a cash break even within a worst case. Don't have all the answers to that question, particularly across some businesses, but also, recognize, those challenges that are coming, and also then starting to think about, okay, so what other opportunities sit around us? Are there new things that we can do? Are there different things that we can do? What is, the world that, hopefully we will all emerge in a few months' time? It will be fundamentally different, and how do we play and how do we position ourselves within that? So there's a strong element of our focus today around survival, a strong element around sort of thinking about, our current cash flows and how we can build them and reinforce them and develop them in a very, very difficult situation. But also one eye on, there is a different world out there that, hopefully we will all get to, God willing, sooner rather than later, in which there will be different opportunities, in which our consumers will behave differently. They'll have different choices. They will behave differently in terms of how they access product and service, and they will be very, very selective, I believe, around the value proposition that a product and service offers. So, all sorts of challenges, some answers, a team very engaged in, fighting a very difficult fight, and one eye on, just what's going to happen out there in the future.
All right, Stephen, thank you. Can I also ask you, as a group, how many people you employ?
We employ around 7,000 people.
And about half your revenues, if I'm right, come from pharmaceuticals and healthcare.
Yeah, we're approximately 50% pharmaceuticals, another 30 to 40% from the Sri Lankan consumer sector. And again, within that, products such as, toothpastes and soap and the like, which, well, I hope everybody's buying soap at the moment.
Sure. Okay, thank you for that. Supun, may I bring you in at this point?
Hi. Yeah. Hi. Good morning, Shamindra. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, the audience. Yes, thank you very much for having me. Just I'll give a context of our business and where we are in terms of as an organization, and then how we have been seeing this challenge and facing it. Our business consists of both mobile, television, fixed line, international, and some digital services. Over the years, we started as a mobile, but over the years have been able to add other lines of business like fixed and TV. So today, mobile contributes to about 65%, between 60 to 65% of our group revenues, and fixed line contributes about 11, TV contributes about 7, and international is about 13. So there is some kind of a balancing of the revenue streams into the group, and similar distribution in profitability. What we are seeing is that overall, when the work from home started, significant shift in traffic from fixed line networks, especially enterprise networks, to the retail, mobile, as well as broadband networks. Overall, we saw about 30 to 40% increase in traffic. This created a massive challenge to all telecom service providers, not only to us, to everyone, locally as well as globally. To keep everyone connected and maintain services. But fortunately, this traffic change happened during daytime. Normally, our networks are designed to handle the peak traffic load, and the peak traffic load is at the night, between 6 p.m. to around 10:30, 11. But daytime traffic increase helped to, in a sense, smoothen the load in the network. But it also had some impact on the night time. We have the biggest challenge in serving this demand is the limited resources we have in terms of spectrum. There's a finite amount of spectrum of radio frequencies that each telco has, and the additional capacity that we can deliver is based on the spectrum allocations that each one of us have, and this is the general global principle. And within that constraint, we have been working to support the network. We also saw larger OTT players like YouTube downgrading their streaming to from HD to SD to support the networks, to make sure that the basic connectivity remains available. The larger challenge we see in threefold. Immediate challenge was distribution. Because prepaid accounts for of our mobile business about 70% of the business. In TV, we have close to about 1 million TV customers who are on prepaid. And when there's curfew and this distribution gets affected, the customers are not able to recharge. So distribution got affected immediately, and then we couldn't distribute. Shops were closed. Secondary challenge was postpaid billing as well as collection. We kept the services uninterrupted on all mobile, television, and broadband. So when there's no interruption, and also when customers are unable to go out and pay bills, collections significantly impacted in the month of March, as well as now we are seeing a massive impact in month of April. Then thereafter, we are seeing the need to also extend concessions to sectors which are significantly impacted by the crisis. If you look at our enterprise business, it accounts for about 17% of our group revenue. And we are seeing enterprises are getting impacted, as all my colleagues mentioned, impacting their businesses, and we are looking at either extending their enterprise capacity or the spend that they spend on their enterprise connectivity to be transferred to their retail consumption, so that there's some kind of balancing of the spend and giving concession, as well as extending concessions especially for sectors like leisure. So that is the three. Those are the three areas. In our approach, we looked at three facets or three dimensions to address this. We had an immediate challenge of supporting the network traffic, network load, making sure the network doesn't crash, and then adding capacity and making changes on the go. That was the biggest challenge. While 2,000 plus staff had to work from home, and then making sure that they can log into the network, keep the network going. And while also we saw a lot of threats on the network, cybersecurity threats are getting higher. So we need to make sure that everyone remains protected in the online world. The second challenge was around the customers making sure that they remain connected, and making sure that we extend some sort of credit or talk time, access to TV, so that they remain connected in the network. Then the midterm plan is around making sure the business can doesn't significantly impact, especially on liquidity, and identifying spends which can be deferred, which can be put on hold. Identifying Capex investments, because we have to invest again a significant sum of money on capacity which was not planned earlier. So extracting Capex from other projects and transferring to capacity Capex. The third area is making sure that we are ready to support the new norm, and building additional capacity, because some of the additional capacity building, capacity augmentation takes more than 3 months. Sometimes it involves fiberizing our base stations, adding more nodes to our sites. So making sure that immediate crisis is managed. Secondary requirement of making sure our customers remain connected, and thirdly, the network and support. Overall, our response has been focused on 3 C's, I would say. The first C is around customer, making sure the customers remain connected. So we had, when distribution went offline, we had a choice of, okay, customers don't have connectivity, they can't recharge, we asked them to come online, or because network is producing traffic, and if you don't produce, utilization comes down, but a lot of customers went offline. So we started adding talk time to them, a special 7-day bundle, which we started giving from end of March or early April. So far, about 15 million of such packs have been redeemed by customers in areas which were locked down. So initially we gave to the entire country because the entire country was locked down. Thereafter, we have still continue giving that to the Western province. And these 3 days we offer when the customer, the other areas, since there's curfew, again, when there's balance coming down, we offer push a special pack to the customer. Objective being keeping everyone connected without also damaging the network quality, and making sure that the network remains usable. Similarly, TV channels were open to everyone. Again, that had a close to about 200 plus million impact on top line on TV. Nevertheless, we had capacity there. It was the satellite, so we switched on all channels for about a month time, and extended concessions on broadband. So looking after the customer was the first C. The second C is about colleagues, making sure all our staff remain protected, and they also, while they serve from home, they also have to go to sites to look after the base stations, and also they go to enterprises or homes when they have either trouble with TV connection or broadband connection. They have to visit homes to make sure that those faults are attended to. So they are also in the front line taking a lot of risk, and our main objective is to make sure that they remain safe. The third C is around the country, to make sure our country remains solid, and we help the country and all our citizens during this challenging period through connectivity, as well as all the other areas that we can support. So that is kind of the focus in terms of in these initiatives. Lastly, we have been also looking after small time supply, especially because we saw cash is a bigger challenge, and making sure that they have access to their payments on time, especially the small time suppliers.
Just out of curiosity, and there was a little bit of banter before we started, that you're possibly the most lucky CEO here, Supun. On an accruals basis, right? Do you foresee that your revenue levels are likely to hold or get better this year? I'm guessing from a non-expert point of view that revenues will hold.
No. I think it's too early to comment, but I think general industry-wide projection is it will be between 0 to 10% negative. But still too early to project because I think we lost a good 1 month in April. And most of the capacity also is discounted, new capacity that is going. Enterprises are affected, so we have to extend concessions. Overall, if the consumer spend is constrained, if the disposable income is constrained, as a service provider which is touching all segments, we are getting affected, and then we are not able to charge the same price that customer paid earlier. So the overall industry assessment is about under 10% impact to the industry. And we have seen globally also telcos are getting about a 30% drop in their market cap or share price, and that is being factored into. The opportunity we see in Sri Lanka is that broadband penetration. Home broadband in Sri Lanka is about 1/3 or 30% of homes have a good broadband connection. And there is potential for this number to increase. That is one big opportunity on the fixed side. On retail side, again, mobile broadband adoption is about 40 to 50% in Sri Lanka. Smartphone penetration is about 55%. So now in the online world and in the serving in the new norm, having a good broadband connection, both mobile as well as fixed, becomes an important aspect. And to support that, we see that more adoption of broadband that will take place in markets such as ours. In developed markets, this is not really an opportunity, but in markets such as ours, we see broadband take up increasing.
Okay, yeah, 10% down can be significant, but I'm sure everybody else on this call will happily take 10%. Show of hands. If you had like a choice of 10% down revenue, would you take that right now? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Christopher?
Yes.
And Stephen too.
Yeah. Overall, yes. Some businesses, no.
Yeah, it's I think that as long as also linked to operating leverage. So unlike a manufacturing organization, our cost structure is not completely variable. So when you have a 10%, if the cost structure is fixed, then it will completely wipe out our entire bottom line. So our net profit margin is about 10%. Even our taxes are paid on top line, not on bottom line. So we don't pay taxes at discount. So though it's 10%, it can have a more than a 50% impact on bottom line if we are not careful with our costs.
Sure, absolutely. And just out of interest, Supun, your industry is famous for its investment cycles, right? New technology keeps coming on, and if you want to retain your customers, you have to be one of the first movers into new technology. So timing this virtually is critical. Right now, we are in the throes of, maybe 5G is the next big thing, right? And you have to start thinking about rolling out those networks. What at this stage do you think is the impact of that investment cycle on your business?
We don't see a significant impact. If at all, some kind of rearranging priorities and areas that we spend money. So we stopped investing, for example, on 3G way back in 2017, adding capacity. We encourage all our customers to move 4G. We refarm spectrum from 2G to 4G. So that is more futuristic and in terms of technology that can continue. So we are adding more capacity onto our 4G network, adding more sites to improve coverage, because we see coverage is also a challenge, and make sure that you have good connectivity. It's not only capacity. We need to fill the gaps that we have in coverage. So it doesn't really see an impact, but globally, what we are seeing is some markets are looking at slowing down some of the 5G related investments, and then also slowing down some of the subsidies that they do on 5G handsets. But in our case, we are not really seeing a need to deprioritize or reduce the capex, but we will rearrange the investment allocation and then prioritize more onto network capacity and adding coverage and making sure that we can support that robust growth in usage.
Right. Some of you in your companies have exposure to foreign currency. Depreciation of the rupee can be a significant impact. I mean, Sri Lankan Airlines, for instance, Ashok, that is the case. For sure, Dialog, that is the case, and I'm sure, I'm not entirely sure, but Ranil, I'm thinking even in a business like yours that is very export driven, this is a concern. Right now, in the environment that we are in, do you have how would you try to mitigate that? How would you try to manage that? If investment were foreign currency, or if operational cash flows mean that foreign currency borrowings have to be resorted to, how are you working around strategizing for that? Can I start with you, Ashok?
Yeah. So obviously it is a tough question, tough situation. Now, if you take the leisure industry, right, we have our borrowings in dollars, right? So obviously, I mean, we need to take exchange losses. It's just a paper entry. But then, I mean, obviously, right, I mean, we may be not in a position because we hardly have any business at all in the hotels. So we have no other choice. We have to push back on our own repayments and obviously, right, I mean, fund the company to pay salaries and things like that. Virtually business is zero. So that's how we are managing it there. And if you take, you were talking about Sri Lankan Airlines, obviously, right, we had a lot of income out of dollars. Now we have our leasing payments to aircraft on, leasing companies we need to make on US dollar terms. So obviously we are going back to the government and, to our shareholders, and we are tapping into their dollar income. And if you look at the government also, why the rupee has depreciated so much and there are so much of import restrictions are in place. The simple reason is the government doesn't have enough income, dollar income. So even for them to give us a dollar lending, they're finding it difficult because they don't have dollar income. So what we do is we are preserving whatever the dollar income, what we are getting out of the, the freighters we are currently operating, and some of the few of the, passenger flights we are operating on ad hoc basis. We are keeping those to, service our dollar, obligations. So apart from that, for salaries and even the government, right, whatever the money that we are taking at this moment, just for our survival until the situation, improves, are coming in Sri Lankan rupee terms.
Ranil, you want to weigh in on that?
Yes, for us in the apparel sector, it's a dollar-based income, foreign currency-based, majority dollar. So the borrowings are also generally matched with dollars. So depreciation of the currency helps only in terms of converting and paying for expenses. So in the short term, there is sometimes a benefit to a company because the dollars will fetch more Sri Lankan rupees. But that's in the short term, because after that, other costs come in down the line and catch us up. Right now, the issues would be that the sector has dollar borrowings for funding their working capital, but now no income, so settling that liability is a problem. So banks are, I think, supportive at this time and giving us time, but it is a challenge until we get back to at least some percentage, at 60-70% of what we were doing earlier.
Supun, it's very different for you. You don't have a lot of dollar revenue, so you're carrying an open position on the exchange rate for your borrowing, aren't you?
Yeah. So we have about $180 million in dollar-denominated debt. As I explained earlier, there's no tax shield on our local borrowing, so effectively it's not really beneficial for us to borrow at high rates from local. Nevertheless, every time the rupee depreciates, we have to provide for that translation loss. So it's an uncash provision, but we do take that into the books. And then we have a significant impact on our television business because satellite payments as well as content payments are in dollars, and then that increases while we charge the consumer on rupee terms. So again, you see that TV business P&L comes under significant pressure when the currency depreciates. Then thirdly, our Capex investments, we invest close to about $150 to $200 million every year. And the amount of equipment that we can buy, the capacity that we can buy from that money in rupee terms is now minimum 10% lesser. So we need to work harder identifying different ways of improving our mix and working with the partners to bring down pricing so that we can maintain the volumes in terms of adding capacity. But it is one significant challenge, especially when it comes to capex and then operational expenditure on television as well as network maintenance costs. And the dollar mark-to-market provisions again. So last month when rupee depreciates by 10 rupees, it means about 2 billion provision into our P&L in just 1 month.
Wow, okay. Ashok, yesterday there was an announcement that Sri Lankan Airlines will receive government bailout. Do you know the details of what this is going to look like?
Well, so all indications are government will support us, but I am not in a position to tell you exactly, what has been agreed. But it is not about a bailout because of this situation. We have put a restructuring paper to the government. From the information what I get is that was planned earlier. That has got approved. It has got the approval of the cabinet. So I think that's fantastic news for Sri Lankan Airlines. But today's context is completely different. From the time that we have given that plan, today things have changed drastically. So obviously, right, I mean, we are in a crisis in terms of how we are going to survive the next 12 months because we hardly have any business. So obviously the government is aware about that. So fortunately, we are owned by the government of Sri Lanka. And I hope that, they will support us at this difficult moment.
So that support can come by in terms of loan guarantees or in terms of, putting a bond into your balance sheet so that you can manage it, or do you need cash?
I mean, we can obviously raise money overseas, right? I mean, if the government can guarantee that. But today's context, it's not the right time to do that. So in the short term, obviously that we need, some support from a monetary perspective directly from the government. It can come by way of loans or whatever from the banks supported by the government. I mean, owned by the government. So maybe down the line, once the situation stabilizes, I think, we can always go to markets and, raise some money, right? I mean, based on the government guarantee. So that's the plan at the moment. So, and also, right, internally, we are doing lots of things. You can't continuously be depending on the government, right? I mean, we had a plan. That's the plan which got approved by the government. That plan, that we went back to the government with the restructuring plan, where we had wanted them to capitalize because we were, starting with a $1 billion debt almost collectively. So the plan has got approved, but unfortunately, if the situation, remains at that level, we wouldn't have wanted to tap into the government money for the next 5 years. That was the plan. But now, given today's situation, obviously, the situation has changed, right? So we need to reevaluate ourselves and see, right, how we can, move forward.
I'm also bringing questions, the many questions that we've got online. So I may paraphrase, I may not refer to them as questions, but I'm certainly reading that stuff. Here's a basic thing, right? If in your sort of budgeting and planning, what is your feel about how far down the crisis we have gone, right? Let's take a 1 to 10 parameters. Okay, 1 meaning we are at the beginning of the crisis, 10 meaning we are virtually at the end. How far down this crisis are we to the best of the estimations that you can make, because you have to make these estimations. You don't have the luxury as chief executives to say, I don't know, let's see what happens, right? Can I start with you, Christopher? How far down the crisis are we? 1 to 10.
Okay, can I give a small explanation before I tell the number?
Yeah.
Basically, if you explain it in a layman's term, I think this is a war, not a battle, really. War is in 3 fronts, like all the gentlemen before me explained them in different terms. 3 fronts is one is the social front, where we protect our people from the pandemic. Number 2 is the economic front. How do we protect our economy from the pandemic? Number 3 is, of course, the cultural front. How do people again go and socialize and to some extent and move around without being restricted and in lockdown, where they are mentally also, stressed out. So there are 3 battles in this war, to simplify it. I think the first battle we are done well, at least to control the spread of the pandemic. We are done well. The second battle, the economic battle is, okay, we have moved a little bit, as you know, we have got room to move on, but as businessmen, we don't really see the environment or the regulation where we should be operating on a more permanent basis. Yeah. To bring Supun in again, like to an example, Supun was telling about the broadband network, you know, getting the towers connected through fiber and home to fiber. We do a lot of work for Dialog for the last 10 years. We have been one of their partners in doing this construction work. So when an activity like that stops, Dialog is affected, the consumer is affected because he doesn't have broadband at home to work from home, and we are affected as a contractor. So this goes round and round. So we from the economic front, we have to find more tools for this battle. The social front comes next. I think after 40 days in isolation, some people are desperate to get out, at least to go and breathe some fresh air. So that will be another challenge, but a plan must be set in. So in that number, from a total view, if you talk about the first battle, maybe I will say 8 out of 10. Second battle, okay, a number maybe from my business experiences, they have given us some permission to work around and all that. So I will put it out 4 out of 10, or 3 or 4 out of 10. And the third one, of course, you know the number already, yeah?
Which means, I mean, it's almost a 0 or a 1.
Yeah, more or less, no?
Yeah, okay. Stephen, can we simplify it to that level?
Yeah, well, number one, I would disagree with your earlier comment. I actually do think as CEOs today, we do have the luxury of going, I don't know. And I think we can actually say that with perfect justification because, and to some extent, I think you have to, because you're dealing with just so many unknowns and so many variables. So normally if I say, I don't know, well, you can say it once, you've said it multiple times, you should probably be looking for another job. But in this environment, I think it's important to recognize that you don't know, and that what you want to build within your teams is an adaptive and a responsive attitude to crisis. So, it's one of the things I enjoy about the environment in which we face today is our speed of decision making has increased 10x, simply because there isn't that, you've got to give people authority and autonomy to get on and take decisions. Because if you insist on boards and approval layers, things never get done. So you have to move quickly. But coming back to the question, I think we're probably about a 3, aren't we? I worry deeply still about the economic consequences and that economic shockwave that's coming. When you start to look at some of the data that's been coming out of the US in terms of 30 million unemployed, growth rates across Europe being sort of the worst they've ever been since they started working this stuff out in 1949. All of those indicators are there. And the reality is that those indicators are only for the month of March. And they're telling you really only 2 weeks, because pretty much the world closed down from mid-March. So the numbers out there are hugely scary. And so to this point in time, we've slightly been living off reserves, savings that people had. And and that's why, clearly it's super, super tough at the moment for those daily wage earners that haven't got any form of income. So that shockwave, I think, is coming. And from the economic side, I think we're at a very early stage in this. And, we've got to think about how we run our businesses within a very, very different economic environment.
Ranil?
Yes, I think we are below 5. Concern for us is, if you take us as a company, Hirdaramani Group, over the last 50 years, doesn't like to let anyone go. We don't do that unless we are forced to. It's a major concern. I think the entire apparel sector realizes that. And we are very conscious of that, because the second thing is the social impact of letting go so many people. So we are planning and trying to manage it, and also through the associations trying to make suggestions and find support from the government, maybe to look at part-time work keep them on, keep the wages going, but keep 2 weeks off, 2 weeks on, or have some shifts, because there's a limited amount of people now who can fit into one location. So we are trying hard, but unfortunately, I feel there will be some pain before we get through this, which is a big concern, especially in a sector where we employ so many people and contribute to the economy as well.
Ashok, how far down are we in this COVID crisis?
Well, it's a very, very tough question to answer, Shamindra, because we really don't know where we are, right? I mean, only good thing may be that we might come out of this permanent curfew situation. That might help us to, come back to most of our businesses, but it may be a very gradual recovery. But maybe still, if we might get into curfew on and off, but I don't think that we are going to go on curfew for what we have seen so far, 45 days continuously. So obviously in that context, right, we have gone through a very worst period. There's no question about it, and still we are going on. But at the same time, I think, we have to look at how the overall economy is going to take off. So there are controllable factors for us, and there are uncontrollable factors for companies like ours. So it is with the authorities and the government. So it all depends on how proactively that they are going to react to this economic situation. So I hope that they will get their act together, because I hope they understand at this moment it's a health disaster. So obviously they are controlling it very well. That we must applaud them for what they have done and control to this level. But now we have to get our balancing act going, because our economy is very critical, because there are so many people, daily wages who are not, having any income. So, so we have to look at from that aspect. And large company falls mean, like, there are so many indirect and direct, businesses and people who will get impact out of that. So I think that the government will have to, step in, and they will have to now think about the economy, how we are going to take the economy forward. I know they have taken a lot of measures, but we need to be on the ball from the government perspective, because that part is not beyond our control. It's beyond our control, right? So we can control, right? We know that where we will be heading for, but it all depends on how these external, factors are going to play off. So that's what I feel. So I don't know that whether I can put a number to this. It's a very difficult thing to put a number. So this is the context that I think, we need to be, concerned about.
Supun, if I can ask you to try to put a quick number to this.
Yeah, it's really hard, as Ashok mentioned. It's very early stage. I would say if you look at a stage in the crisis, I would say it's between 3 and 4 in terms of stage, because it's one hand it's a health challenge, other hand it's economic challenge, local domestic challenge, and no matter how much great we do in both health and economic challenge fronts locally, we are also heavily dependent on how the global pandemic situation recovers. Because most of our exports are dependent on the West, and then those markets need to recover. Then tourism is again a big factor in our economy. Remittances are a big factor in our economy. So a lot of other dependence that we have. I think, again, still government is prioritizing on lives over livelihoods, because that is the right thing to do. You can bring back the economy, but you can't bring back a dead person. And if we make the country sick by being irrational in this process, we will have a long-lasting impact on our economy. So it is very important to be careful in this and not to hurry the process. But I think there's a significant responsibility to the authorities to manage it. But also, I think we have, as citizens, we have even bigger responsibility in making sure that we do the right thing, we remain responsible, and we do our part in making sure that this doesn't spread and we contain it. And then that, I think, is a very significant part of our responsibility and coming out of this. That's how I put it.
Okay. I also take Christopher's point that there isn't much clarity about the operating environment right now from a policy point of view, right? And potentially there's something you want. Can I ask you this question? I'll give you a multiple choice, right? If there's something the government can deliver right now, and you could choose maybe one thing, would you want a strong currency? Would you want access to low cost finance, or would you want a flexible labor laws, more flexible labor laws than we currently have? Pick one. Can I start with you, Stephen?
Yep, sorry. It's a difficult question.
You can put in a different point.
Strength of currency doesn't overly concern me. Cost of funding, I think probably I would come down to labor laws more than anything else.
Ranil.
Because again, if I could just to sort of supplement on why, because again, it's just this fundamental part of your cost structure and a very big part of everyone's or certainly most of us cost structure, where you've just got to have a greater degree of flexibility there.
Right.
Yes, the flexible labor laws, like I mentioned earlier, part-time work, basic wage to be paid, but flexible from the company point of view. I think overseas in Europe, they do that furlough, where you are kept at home until you're required. I think that flexibility plus working on maybe the foreseeable future during holidays without having to burden the company with more than the normal pay. Stuff like that. I think that if I understand, those things are being discussed already. Just that I think it has to go to the government, and they have to make those decisions, which are not easy. I sympathize with them, but I think in this situation, some tough decisions have to be made for the future.
Christopher?
Yes, just agreeing with the expressions expressed by Jeevan and Ranil. Basically, the labor component is quite a big component, and right now, especially with limited work, limited work and requirement to tone down on cost. So we have to have better labor laws in place to allow businesses to do that. Otherwise, the businesses can't sustain themselves. Or all the alternative, of course, which our government doesn't have the luxury, and we can't afford it, our economy can't afford it, subsidize the labor payments, which is of course a tall order, but it's a difficult thing to do. Otherwise, if you can't subsidize the labor payments, then at least give us the opportunity to subsidize it ourselves.
Ashok?
Yeah, I think we need both, right?
That is access to low-cost financing and flexibility,
and the flexibility on the labor laws, right? So because this is a huge crisis. We need all angles to be. We need support on all angles. Obviously, I agree with all the other panelists in terms of what they said about the labor laws, right? We need to be flexible. We can't have all these strict laws and move forward, because we don't have the capacity right now. So I think it's all about, as I said from the beginning, it's about the survival. So we need these flexibilities to survive, because this is our biggest challenge I think we all have seen in our lifetime, hopefully for our rest of life as well. So I think we need to have all measures and support to overcome this, and as a nation as well.
Supun?
Yeah, I think primary is access to low-cost financing. The other one is, I think, labor laws. I would put it in a manner that which can be practically done. Stuff like EPF, ETF payments can be deferred at least for 6 months. And that is for an employee, it's about good 15% of the labor cost. Then there is also stuff like giving concessions on tax deductions, double, triple deductions on labor payments. Again, helps what Joshua mentioned, but not having to directly spend money, but helping the company, because then effectively you are subsidizing over a period of time. But it also takes the burden away from the employer completely, and then government steps in through kind of additional tax relief measures on the labor payments.
Okay, I'll take a few questions also that have come in. This is to you, Mr. Pathirage. this is about, I mean, many of the questions that address you are also discussing Sri Lankan Airlines. Is this a time to make a tough decision about Sri Lankan Airlines? Because, I mean, it lost 40 billion rupees last financial year, I think. To put that in context, the emergency package that the government has just announced for small and medium-sized businesses, I think, is about 50 billion. You know, that is, it's about 0.3% of GDP, the equivalent. What's your view on this? You know, is this a crisis that shouldn't be allowed to be wasted, and maybe make some tough calls on Sri Lankan Airlines?
Yeah, so you have to, Shamindra, understand, right? I mean, these are all accumulation of issues, right? You know, has come to Sri Lankan, you know, having lots of issues. But the point is, right? I mean, end of the day, we as a nation, we need to understand, right, the importance, right? We need to make a call whether we need a national carrier. And also, right, I mean, as you know very well, tourism is our main growth sector right now. And hopefully right now, of course, we have issue, but this is where that I think that, I mean, there's so much of potential, right? And even today, if you look at it, I mean, we are in emergency. I mean, because luckily Sri Lankan Airlines is there that we can do these rescue flights and, you know, bring all our stranded children, you know, people who are affected by health problems and various things. And even today's context, I can tell you in terms of the students alone, I think right around the world, we have about almost 10,000 students who are stranded, and that we are seeking government approval, and we are trying our best to bring them back. So there are many ways that the Sri Lankan Airlines, you know, national carrier can help growing our, you know, help in the country in terms of its objectives. So I think you know, as long as that you can manage it, so it's an opportunity also to see how we can cut down unnecessary expenses, how we can restructure. So this is something that we already have looked at. So that's the restructuring package that which got approved from the cabinet. Okay, but unfortunately, right, that we came into this COVID situation. So this is definitely, there's no question about it, this is going to impact the Sri Lankan Airlines. So further. So obviously we need to find a way how we are going to, you know, finance this. So if you manage anything, whether it's airline or hotel or any industry, if you manage it well without corruption and with having the right people and with having the right business plan, I think anything can be successful. So right now we have everything, you know, right, in terms of we have the right plan, but obviously, right, with this given scenario that we need to relook at, we have to rework our business plans. I know the next 12 months are going to be extremely difficult, right, for the airline. But hopefully, if everything goes get back, right, I mean, tourism has to start at some point. And if tourism is not going to come into this country without, you know, we bring in the passengers into, you know, into our country. So I think it's a national asset. I mean, it's all about, you know, how we handle that. And so it's a call that, I mean, you know, everybody has to, you know, the shareholders has to think, right? We can give our best proposals, and we can tell the pluses and minuses, and we can, you know, maybe run the airline even in a much better way. But obviously, right, we need this support from the government, right? Stakeholder, that is the only stakeholder to continue flying. But I think, you know, Sri Lankan, we need a national airline. There's no question about it. A developing nation like us.
Quick, I'm following up on something Christopher mentioned. You know, the lack of clarity on the operating environment right now. You know, I mean, I'm getting the sense from what you are all saying that you would wish at this point in the crisis that we had more clarity. Right? Can you address that specifically in terms of your company or industry? You know, on what issues would you like more clarity right now? That you feel we should be having it. We should be having. Can I start with you, Christopher?
Okay. So basically, I'll primarily talk about the construction industry. Of course, there is the health authority compliance, public health officers, and the health department requirements. And of course, the government task force authority to authorize give work permits and per curfew passes and authorized work. So of course they are doing a good job. In fact, they have been very, very receptive, and we have been compliant, of course, to all the preventive measures and the safety measures, and of course the social distancing in the accommodation and work areas and environment. Tell you what the confusion, give an example is, for example, now if we have like a laborer traveling from, we say from Kandy, not Kandy is a bad example, I say maybe Vavuniya to Colombo. Vavuniya is a non-COVID area. Now he's coming to Colombo to work, but he's not allowed to travel. So that's a little confusing for me, because he's not in a risk area. He's coming into a zone where he can work and be productive, and he's not going back. Okay, going back is the risk, not coming in. He's not carrying the disease in. So going back, he can undergo a quarantine and all that. So the authorities tell, I've seen some, of course, some paperwork where the authorities, the task force says, yes, you can have movement of labor within districts and provinces subject to the approval of the health authorities. But the health authority circular says that you can't have movement between provinces and districts. So
got it.
I gave an example so that you understand it better. So things like that, I think we need to iron out. They are not big issues, but if you iron them out, it simplifies and gives a little more logic and clarity in our working environment, where we are trying to carry some work under these extreme circumstances. It's not that we have to do volume work. Everybody in the panel will agree. At the maximum, we'll be operating at maybe 30% capacity. So that's not a case of overcrowding or or getting everybody in and trying to do. No, the environment doesn't enable us to do that at all. So that's the type of issues, for an example.
We have maybe like 10-15 minutes to go. Ranil, can I ask you to
weigh in? Maybe if Shamindra allows me to quickly mention about some of the challenges that we have. I think overall we have got really good support from the government and the regulator, and then helping clearing the bottlenecks. But one very big challenge that we have is getting down our equipment, because there's a ban on all imports apart from probably few essential stuff. But now connectivity is very essential to keep everything going. But we are not. We have a lot of restrictions. We don't have equipment importation cleared in that list. So that is something that we really need clarity and then clearance if we are to keep supporting the country.
Got it. Ranil and Stephen, you want to succinctly weigh in on that? Ranil, to start with.
Yes, we are facing disruption, especially as I mentioned earlier, when there is suddenly curfew declared. In the places where the virus has not spread, there are plenty of support from the authorities to help us to get up to it. But as Christo mentioned, 30%, 35% is about where we are getting in our capacity and productivity. I don't know what the solution is, but the government, when they bring in restrictions suddenly, for example, this weekend is curfew, some of those possible orders that we could ship out cannot be produced, then it gets delayed. So there is a chance that we'll miss out and be unable to send it out and get some income. So that basic thing is affecting us quite seriously at this time. So they need to try to look at it and try. I am not sure how the authorities look at it, try to give us some form of a plan for at least the next week to say these areas are clear, go for it. We'll help you at least to get to 50%. Something like that to work, because these now sudden shocks are coming to us and the planning is almost impossible at times.
So you want a framework, or you want a sort of task force that you can quickly sort of find solutions to?
Understand. Understand what's happening. I mean, health is the priority. We really need to ensure that we don't have this spreading. But from manufacturing point of view, you are unable to plan very much when there's constant disruption, and you cannot run at even that 25-30%, which is possible.
Got it. Stephen?
Yeah, overall, I would say I think the government is doing a good job. Let's be clear, this is unprecedented, has never been used so much as a word in the history of the English language. And that's the reality. So it's genuinely difficult. So I've got enormous sympathies for what the government is trying to do. I think similar to what others have expressed, it's those difficulties that, you know, one is the freedom of movement, and the restrictions around that make it very hard to have the right people in the right place at the right time. And also it's trying to be and I accept it's a hugely difficult ask, but trying to be a little bit more forward looking so that we have the visibility on what's happening. You know, if you take the last few weekends, will curfew be lifted in Colombo, Gampahar and the rest? Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, no. And so, you know, businesses are fundamentally about trying to plan and organize your resources. It's a very difficult environment to do that within. But I say, you know, yeah, and you're forced back into this very sort of ad hoc way of finding solutions to problems. And, you know, by one means or another, we find our way through. But it's genuinely difficult.
Let me also sort of, as we wrap up, and I'll ask each of you to take maybe a minute to wrap up quickly, but this is something you can, okay, maybe you can address this in your final comments. When sort of we are looking at the scale of this crisis, an emerging sort of idea is that this will result in a rolling back of globalization. We will be turning inwards, becoming an economy, a country that manufactures most of what it needs in Sri Lanka, or at least that seems to be the tone and the sort of direction that we see from policymakers suggesting. Surely there will be impacts on supply chains, and as a result, globalization will retreat to some degree. But what is, in your closing remarks, can you also address this, you know, over the medium to long term, can Sri Lanka afford not to be globally linked? A country that is open to the rest of the world and in fact sees its future as one that is linked to the rest of the world. Can I ask Ashok to start off with?
Yeah, Shavendra, now that's a very, very interesting question. So I think we have come out of those things, you know, from 30, 40 years back, we were completely closed up economy and we have suffered enough. I don't think, I mean, we should even think about, you know, getting there. But of course that there are learnings that there are certain things that we can do, we can produce locally. So we must, I mean, seriously look at that. But having said that, I mean, if you want to thrive in this, of course, the global economy is under threat right now. But I think some point that, I mean, things will settle down. And we need to have that hope. And we need to get back and we need to connect with the rest of the world. I mean, if we really want to, I mean, you know, take the advantage of the technology to what is available outside. And we cannot have a closed up economy and go back to 18th century. So, I mean, if anyone is thinking like that, it's ridiculous. I think it's a temporary thing that, I mean, there's nothing else we can do because our borders are closed, no way of transportation and, you know, no traveling. So in that kind of a situation, on a temporary basis, that, I mean, you need to think inward. But I think, you know, if at all, I mean, if you are really thinking about on a permanent basis or medium basis, I think it's a mistake. I think we really have to connect ourselves with the rest of the world. Our incomes are today coming from that. Our main incomes are coming from tourism. We can develop this nation to earn more money out of the tourism and, you know, making a great city. I mean, all the investments are already in place. Then, I mean, you know, rest of the things, I mean, you know, our IT, you know, solutions to call centers to, you know, all that. I mean, and our exports, right? I mean, all that happens because, I mean, that it's win-win situation. I mean, you can't have a closed up economy and expect, you know, to export everything to outside. So it has to be a give and take situation. So I think we need to continue our course without, I mean, changing directions on a permanent basis. I think this is a short-term measure, but we obviously have to be fully connected with the rest of the world and think openly.
Christopher?
Yes, just endorsing whatever Ashok said. I think he explained it very well. Of course, first of all, we have to depend. We are a trading country, and we depend on the world economy for our survival as well, tourism, foreign remittances, exports. But nevertheless, we have to be at least self-sufficient in some of the industries, at least food and agriculture. That is for sure. You know, at least we should have to produce the food we consume. You know, and have the agricultural support to produce that and give it to the consumer at least. Then from the other perspective, of course, generally speaking, of course, the minimize the foreign currency outflow. That's another challenge which the government is facing. So one is, of course, definitely from our industry perspective, if I tell you, it's the foreign labor which is there. We have about maybe 30,000 plus foreign laborers in the country, construction laborers. For some the simple reason is I think we have a huge youth unemployment in double digits, but we can attract them to the construction industry to do the masonry, bar bending, and carpentry work. So we have given it some thought and given it some ideas where we can. The attraction is for the government, for the government employment and government job, where we are floating an idea where government creates a job bank where they can guarantee employment for maybe 50 or 60,000 youth, replacing these foreign workers. And from an industry perspective, we will take them at a higher value. If the government says their pay is 1,000, we will take them at 1,500 and return them back to the job bank where they can be mobilized in a different place, because as a contractor, we don't have continuous work. So that is a sustainable model, which we hopefully, one thing is then you save the remittances, foreign workers cost. The other thing is another attraction, bit of industry related, which I like to share, is that attracting people to come and invest in the country. Not the big investors, of course. We are trying to promote many FDIs, well and good, with the port city and the other industries, but just individuals, like for example, a resident visa basis. Now we have a scheme where you, for $250,000 investment in a particular industry or the stock exchange or a BOI approved business, you get a resident visa. But I think that is too much. $250,000, you can get resident visas in the developed world too. So the solution here is to start in a more pragmatic level where we say that, okay, $150,000, when you invest $50,000, buy an apartment, so that it's an asset in Sri Lanka, foreign currency in, then you get the resident visa, and within 3 years, you top up your $150,000. So from a numbers perspective, if you get 1,000 people to respond, you have $150 million. And 1,000 people is not a big number at $50,000. So I think we have to think out of the box. And the other opportunity here is, of course, the COVID opportunity is the fuel cost. The fuel is down from $60 in February this year to $15 today. So 1/4 the cost, and basically we spend $2.5 billion a year in importing fuel, $2.5 billion at $60 level. So what is the option of buying at $15 and stocking for the next year? Maybe, obviously, we don't have the storage capacity. It can be elsewhere in a third country, or maybe in barges in Hambantota port. If we store for the next year, we'll save more than $1 billion. Of course, this is off the top, this is not my expertise, but just giving an idea to at least see what we can do at this time to see how we can support and pop up our economy in the medium term.
Got it. Thank you, Christopher. Ranil, can I come to you next? This is not going to lead to a retreat of globalization over the long term, you think? And Sri Lanka shouldn't anticipate that?
No, I fully endorse what Ashok said. There's no way Sri Lanka can go backwards. We need to look forward and look at whatever opportunities that will come once the dust settles and things are calmer. And being in an export industry, what ideally would be some access to some markets. I know these free trade agreements are not a popular word sometimes, but maybe some things have to be worked out if we are to sustain and also employ as much as possible of people who are available and keep society going. So that maybe government needs to start looking at things like that and get closer to friendly nations and give access to the exporters. I'm speaking from the export side of that, and find ways to help us through. I know right now is not the time, but they have to work on it. And maybe when things are calmer, we can get on with it.
Stephen.
Yeah, I'm with everybody else. I don't think there's a question about it. I think there's hardly a country in the world today that could go down this path of isolation. Clearly in terms of accessing technology, raw material, all sorts of expertise, we have to be part of the world. I can't see any other way going. I think within the changes that we will see within globalization, I think there's opportunities for the country as well. I think that US-China friction that has developed over the last couple of years, and this particular crisis will mean that major companies around the world will think differently about how they access and how they structure their supply chain. So I think there's a real opportunity as well around this for change. I think we've got to sit back and work out what are we really good at, what needs, whether those be product or service or whatever, that we're best placed as Sri Lanka to provide to the world, and really look to sort of leverage on them. We shouldn't be running around like headless chickens. It's thinking about where we want to place our bets in terms of how we can build things going forward. But we have to be, the world works much better by us all, collaborating and cooperating and sharing thoughts and ideas and capital and technology and everything else.
Thank you. Supun, you have the last words.
Yeah, I think, I fully concur with everyone who has been supporting our industry. I think is a very good example of to anyone to reflect. 30 years ago, you would have to wait in a queue to get a telephone line. Today, it is the largest in terms of FDI attracting to the country, as well as keeping everyone connected. We are today on par with anyone in the region or in the world in terms of connectivity. So without access to foreign capital and technology, we wouldn't have got here. But I think, as Joshua mentioned, agriculture is one area that we need to really do well. And also innovation. I think there's a lot of capacity in our youth and our resources, very well educated youth that we have and the public we have. So one good example I can give is we have this public-private partnership on the nanotechnology. Around 2008, we created the Sri Lanka Nanotechnology Institute. And it has been trying its best to come up with innovations, but recent crisis really gave them opportunity to think different. They have created for PCR testing the throat swab that is now producing at large scale at around 3,000 swabs a day by the Nanotechnology Institute. And then also they have created a nanosterile coating material which can be applied, again bringing our capability, our knowledge, and then building on it. So innovation is something that we can do, and we can build on these platforms, and then that's something that we really encourage. Lastly, I think this is a good wake-up call for everyone to drive digital transformation in our organizations, make ourselves future ready. We don't need to wait for a crisis like this to come and hit us to remind about online. And it is something that now we need to really accelerate if we are to survive in future.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for participating. So let me first thank our audience. I think we've had a great audience, a lot of questions. I tried to incorporate as many of them and paraphrase to you, picking up the main themes that we were getting from the audience. So thank you very much for that active participation to Ashok, Christopher, Ranil, Stephen and Supun. On behalf of everybody who's been part of this, we've had several hundred people on Facebook and about 280 people on Zoom. I haven't really checked the Facebook total right now. So we've had a large audience, and I'm sure they have come away with an inclination, an idea about how you are thinking about the economy, about your own businesses. So thank you for taking the time to provide that insight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having us.